Okay, I'm going to start the learning sponsors. Year of Learning, Gail and Leslie Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Mushka Shmunsabad Yosef Chaim Vachava, Hanan ben Moshe Eliezer Vachana, Pesha bat Shmo Yitzchak Halevi V'Tzipora, Isra ben Yoel Moshe Ohen Vachana, Rexford Friends of Gladys Sherman, Gutta Bat Meir, Michael Klein and Friends of Judah Klein, Yehuda Tzvi ben Chaim, Marsha Brana, in memory of her husband, Harav Yerachmiel ben Shmuel, Friends and family of Arthur Ritholtz, Mordechai Yudel ben Baruch Leib HaKohen, Friends and family of Siggy Bessler, Shalom Shraga ben Dov, Friends of Marvin Weinstein, Mordechai Ozer ben Yisrael Aharon, Sarah Alpert, in memory of her husband, Rav Tzvi Lipa ben Hillel, Rexford Friends of Maddie Friedman, Mindel Miriam Bat Kalman Ruvain, Bella and David Adler, in memory of her father, Eliyahu ben Yosef HaKohen, Friends of Honey Chaifetz, Hannah Shoshana Bat Yosef. Month of Learning by Susan and Ruvain Podolsky, in memory of her father, Simcha Bunam ben Yeshua. Susan and Ruvain Podolsky, in memory of her mother, Chaya Bat Avram Dov. Michael and Judith Poretsky, in memory of his mother, Rachel Bat Avraham. Jack Gilman, in memory of his brother, Zev Yosef ben Yitzchak. Aaron and Melvin Haller, in memory of her father, Yosef Eliezer ben Tzvi Hirsch. Barbara Stern, in memory of her brother, Israel Avram ben David Motcha. Sonia and Bernie Krutz, in memory of their dear friend Honey Chaifetz. She touched so many lives in the best way. Week of Learning by Andrew and Stephanie Becker, in memory of his mother, Chaya Leah Bat Yehoshua, and in honor of his friend Rabbi Mordechai Eskovitz, who said Kaddish for her. May the Shamas have an Aliyah, Kranker of Rabbi Yeshua Shem L'Chayach B'nai Israel, a good Gebenchtia.
I will say, at the very bottom of Pei Zion Amid Days, the last few words, on Rabbi Yanai. Now, in order to make this make sense, yesterday we're really involved in the halachas of a worker being able to eat when he's working for the owner of the field of produce or the vineyard, etc. So one of the things we said yesterday, when the pasuk compares yourself as the owner to yourself when you're the worker, so another we said just like yourself as the owner is not obligated on Meiser, also you when you're the worker not obligated on Meiser. Now you have to realize that that was teaching us that what? That we don't look at the worker as a buyer. Because why? Because we're going to see in a minute, because it makes sense to say that a buyer automatically is already obligated on Meiser. Now let's talk about Meiser in general. We have three times that we have to think about. One time is that the fruit is developed enough, the produce is developed enough to be chayv meiser. That's called onus meiser. It's different for each produce. A second thing is what we call the gemara malacha or the goren, or like when it's piled up at the threshing floor. That's when the processing is finished. It's the second time we say, oh, then you chayv. One, you can't be chayv meiser if the fruit hasn't developed to onus meiser. So that point of development, it's not the fruit yet that we can be obligated, not the produce. Then we have another time, which we talked about, which is called when the processing is finished, everything obligated. I believe we're talking about. And then we have a third time that we start to talk about, which is well, when you take it into the house or you take it into the courtyard. And then we have a fourth set of times, which is 7 things that automatically make a person obligated. We have all these things. We'll talk about the rice, the rabbanan, 7 different things. And one of we'll talk about, for example, we'll discuss whether this is what we're talking about now. For example, buying or Shabbos or all kinds of things which may automatically make the produce liable to Meiser. So one is those again. So one is we're talking about just the level of development of the produce. But then after we're talking about what? Some later stage where the person is actually obligated. We have to all some a combination. But we're going to challenge what we said yesterday, because yesterday when we were dashing the Tukim from the Torah, the implication was that, oh, yes, you, when you're working for the person who owns the produce, you're just like him, you can eat it. It's not chayv and meiser. But when you buy it, you're chayv and meiser. It sounds like what? That buying it automatically, and it's the opposite of what we say, buying it automatically makes it tabel already, makes it a produce that needs to be meiser. You have to give meiser. So let's see that inside. I'm Rabbi Yanai. So Rabbi Yanai taught us. Ain't a tabel mischayv and meiser. No, untied produce is not obligated to be tied, even if you've already brought it to the point, for example, by grains, of smoothing out the grain pile. I said, what from the Torah until the fruit actually produce actually enters the house. It comes into the front door. Pnei Abayis is a way of saying what the front door is opposed to by the roof or through the backyard. Shenemar, as it says, V'yarte Kodesh Ben Abayis in the confession that we make in the fourth and sixth year of the 7 year cycle. A person says, "I've taken out the holies, those Zemaisis from the house." So you see what? It has to come into the house to be obligated. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Afilu Chotzer Gabas. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Says, you know what? It's not only the house, even bringing it into the courtyard. Shenemar, as it says, because it says you have to blah blah blah, etc., etc. The blah blah. The pasuk says, and then it ends. They're going to eat it in your gates and be satisfied. So what a gate is, a gate to the, not just the gate to the house. There's a gate to the courtyards. Even in the courtyard already is obligated to take ma'aser. Rabbi Yochanan Nami. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan also 1 second. How can Rabbi Yochanan say that that in the courtyard it says house? Malachai says what? That's just the way of defining courtyard. What to do with the bias? Is he what that the courtyard already? You already have when you bring it into the gate of the courtyard. It has to be like the house. Ma bias mishtamar chatz mishtamar. It's just like the house is a place that's guarded. So too is a chutzner place that's guarded. Guarded has a lot of meanings by a chutzner. A person's comfortable to eat there, all kinds of different things. He's comfortable in the place like his house. Therefore, so he says what it's really when you bring it into the courtyard. The house just a way of defining the courtyard. The courtyard has to be a courtyard that's like a house, but courtyard alone is sufficient. All right. Rabbi Yanai Nami. Rabbi Yanai also says, okay, 1 second, but 1 second. So how come Rabbi Yanai limits it to the house? It also says gate, shouldn't the gate to the courtyard? When we buy the ma'ayale der shar la fuke, he says, no, that's not coming to tell you any gate, including the gate of the courtyard. No, it's specifically the house. Why do you use the word gate? Not to include the gate of the courtyard, but rather what? That there has to be the gate has to be the main door of the house. You have to go into the house. But and what la fuke to the exclusion of derech gavis hafefiyot. But bring in the produce by the way of the roof or by way of the backyard, okay, the low you're not chayv. So now the way we learn now simply when are you chayv? So you have to each opinion either you have to at least have brought it into the house, even if it's the food is developed enough. But until you bring it into the house, or until you bring it into the courtyard, each man according to his opinion, you're not chayv ma'asos. Maser v'chanina. He has a kasha from what we learned yesterday. 1 second, didn't we learn the nafshecha when we spoke about the worker eating the produce? Okay, when he's working in the field and by the boss, he says, like yourself, like your desire. Okay, never shall Paul. No, it's the same way that you the worker, if the same way the worker would partake if he were the boss, the worker partakes from the boss's stuff when he's the worker. Manav shach okopater. Just like what? Just like the boss in that case was able to eat out in the field and be exempt. Abnasho shopol. Also, the worker is exempt. Okay, ochel opat. He's able to eat. He's exempt from mice. Hi, but what's the whole point? What's the upshot? But if he's a buyer, if he would buy it, then he would be obligated. You see what? So the whole chiddush of the pasuk there is to teach me what that the worker, even though we're giving him this stuff, he's not considered like a buyer. But a buyer would have to take mice even out in the field. There's nothing in the field, so you have a big kasha. How could these two? How could Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yanai tell me each one respectively? You have to take it into the house. You have to take it into the courtyard. We see already from the Torah, since that a Torah had to come tell me how to exclude the worker from being a buyer. You see that a buyer has to take meiser, even if it's in the field. Once he bought it, that's enough. That's enough to bring it to the state of being obligated in meiser, and even in the field. So it's against what we said yesterday. Pardon me. So yes, what we said yesterday is against Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yanai both. Rav Papa, they said no. You're making a mistake. The case there that where we excluded a buyer was really when it was in the house or in the courtyard, respectively. It sounds strange, but what happened? He says the case is what? But Ta'ena, Omedes Begina. It's an example. Let's say you have a fig tree, okay, and it's actually in the garden. It's not in the courtyard of the house. The nofa, but the foliage, the branches extend no to the chatzar skin. They go into the courtyard. Okay. Now ulaman damer labayis, and according to the opinion, it says it goes to the house labayis. So the branches are literally going into the courtyard or into the house. Now what's the point? So you say what? The since what? But on one hand, the main tree is really outside, but the branches are inside. Okay. Therefore what? So these particular figs that you're going to pull off, where each opinion, according to each rabbi, according to his opinion, you're pulling them off in the courtyard, or you're pulling them off in the house. No, it's in the no. It's in the house. It's in the house. So now he says, and therefore, as they pull them, they're already pulling off the fruit in the house or in the courtyard. Where it says, Yachi, balabais, laminchai. Then 1 second, what are you talking about? If you're really pulling them off in the house or the courtyard, why would only a buyer be obligated as opposed to the owner? Also, the owner be obligated. Why? It's in the house or it's in the courtyard, and it's developed, and you're pulling it off. Everybody should be chayav. So the answer is no. It's specifically the buyer, and it won't be the owner or the worker. Why? Why? Because the owner, he's really interested in his date palm, in his fig tree. And what's the point? So since the fig tree is outside, okay, so as far as he's concerned, it's the tree that's the main thing, and therefore until he harvests the whole tree and brings it into the house, it's not considered done. For him, it's not finished, but he's got a whole tree to harvest, and also, I assume also the worker. But a buyer's only interested in what he's buying. So if the buyer bought the fruits that he's taking right now, so the ones he's taking the ones that are in the courtyard or the ones that are already in the house. So therefore, what? Of course, he's obligated Meiser because his context or his framework is that they're already done. They're in the house. They're in the house. They're in the courtyard. But the owner, since the main tree is standing outside the courtyard or outside the house, alternatively, as far as he's concerned, the work's not done. He's got to harvest all the tree. So we solved the problem. So therefore, even though you told me that the buyer is different than the boss, it's not that the buyer is different than the boss in the sense that he has to give Meiser out in the field. No, nobody has to give Meiser out in the field from the Torah except for what? Unless you brought it to the courtyard or to the house, according to each respective opinion. But a buyer, ironically, when it'll be different from the owner in the respect that in a house where most of the tree is not in the house, or most of the tree is not in the courtyard, and the buyer is picking in the house of the courtyard. For him, the whole universe is the few things that he's buying that he's hired. My Rebbe of blessed memory would always tease because he would say, it's a famous expression in the world. It says, all the world is a stage. But who said all the world is a stage? A playwright, Shakespeare. In his world, all the world is a stage. That's his business. You understand? So people tend to define things according to their own personal experience. And that's really true. So the owner is what he's interested in the tree. Most of the trees outside the courtyard. So what if you pick a few figs off in the courtyard or the house? You're outside. The work's not done. The tree's got to be harvested. But the buyer, since he's interested in the few pieces of fruit that he's buying, where it is. That's the end of the line. Each person defines it according to the context that they're in. Okay, now but I still have a question. But we still come up with a tremendous idea, and we're going to see. We're not going to say this way in the end. Right now, we're saying what? Then from the Torah, a person who bought has to give meiser. We're going to see in a minute that we learn from the Torah. It's exactly the opposite. That only a person who's going to consume is going to be obligated to give meiser, but a person who's selling things or a person who buys things is not obligated. But the way you just learned now, from the Torah, a buyer is obligated. That's what you just showed me. A buyer is obligated to give meiser. How can you say such a thing? But how can you tell me that the buyer is obligated to give meiser? I'm going to show you that from the Torah, no buyer is obligated to give meiser. Why? He says, is a buyer obligated to take meiser? Tanya, didn't we learn? If Beis China was a place. Why were the shops of Beis China destroyed? They were punished. 3 years before Yerushalayim was destroyed, they were already destroyed. Why? Because they conducted themselves when it came to Meiser, according to the Torah law, ignoring the rabbinic law. So they used the pasuk to prove that midoraisa, which is what we're talking about, that they weren't obligated Meiser. So I mean, what is it that they said? And they were correct what the Torah said. But the rabbis decreed, but they were correct what they said. The Torah said, look, what is it? It says aser to aser. Okay, aser to aser. Okay, you have to. It's one. One pasuk says. Aser tasa eskotu azarecha yotu asad. One pasuk says what? You have to surely take meiser of all of the produce, etc., that comes out in the field year to year. And you have to eat it in front of the Lord your God. In the place where Hashem chooses to make his name dwell. The meiser, the meiser, etc. So now he says, and it says what? And you're gonna eat it. And it's talking here about Ma'aser Sheni, but it's not the point. But you're gonna eat it in such a place. Who has to give Ma'aser? A person who's going to eat it, not a person who's going to sell their produce. Okay, when it says the two of your planting, etc., of your crops, Below halokeach, what? It has to be one that belongs to you and not the one who buys it. So you see clearly they learn that from the Torah that a person who sells their produce or a person who buys produce, neither of them are obligated to take meiser. Elami will only take meiser. So you see what? From the Torah, a buyer is not obligated. So how did you tell me yesterday what that the whole point of the Torah is to tell me what you and the boss are the same, as opposed to what we don't say that the worker is a buyer because the buyer has to give meiser. We saw clearly, even though they were wrong for not listening to the rabbis, but they were right that from the Torah, what a buyer doesn't have to give meiser. Well, Ella says, you know what? We got to drop it. You're right. Neither Rabbanan. Okay, he says you're right. The truth is that the whole idea that we said that a buyer has to, buying makes a person obligated to give meiser is dafka what is a rabbinic obligation. And when they darshan, what we said yesterday, like you, like the master, was just a way of the rabbis finding a support. What they're saying, no, because the rabbis knew that God mandated to make decrees, to make the rabbis were mandated to make fences and to make enactments, make decrees and enactments. But they knew that God wanted them to do that, and therefore they always double check themselves. And they look back, and they always found in the written law an indication of Hashem. What's the word? Presupposing the decree that they were going to make. You understand? To me, you feel, oh, God knew we were going to do this. You understand? They found it in the Torah. Not that it's a Torah law, you understand, but a Torah indication that for what the rabbis did. So they say they did it. They did it right. You understand? They can breathe easily. Okay. So therefore, what? It's only nesmachta. So now I'm stuck. Okay. So we're out of the frying pan. We're into the fire. Okay. Very good. So now you said what? That the whole thing that the whole thing is not so. That pasuk really never meant that from the Torah a buyer has to give. A buyer doesn't have to give from the Torah. But then what are we going to do? What are we going to do with that drasha that we had that problem? He said, what was the whole point of saying like you? Okay, we said like you, like the boss. Okay, or like the boss, the worker. Pardon me. So Lamayata. So what's the whole point of that drasha? The answer is the Tanya. Don't worry, there is a halacha that we learn from the Torah. Kanavshecha, just like you, like when you're the boss, just like you, if you're the boss, let's say you stop yourself from eating. Now the Torah forbids us when the animal is threshing the grain. We're not allowed to muzzle the animal. You can't have the animal thresh the grain and stop it from eating. The animal's threshing the grain, you have to let it. So we're not allowed to muzzle the animal. What happens if an owner muzzles himself? He wants to eat, he doesn't eat. Okay, if he doesn't eat, okay, just like if you're the boss and what, and you don't eat while you're working your crops, Potter, you're exempt, okay? And we don't say what? We don't say that the prohibition of not muzzling the ox, which we would learn from a Kal V'chomer, maybe you did a prohibition for yourself. We don't say it doesn't apply to the boss. That's the pasuk teaching. Also, what? Also the worker. If you stop the worker from eating, he was allowed to eat. Whether you paid him not to eat or you physically stopped him, doesn't matter. Potter. Forget about whether you owe him or not. But as far as getting lashes for the negative precept of muzzling an ox while it's threshing, you're exempt. You're not going to get lashes for stopping the guy from eating. So just like you don't get lashes for stopping yourself from eating, so too do you not get lashes for stopping your work from eating. And that's a doraisa learning from like just like you also just like if you're the boss, you have law. Also, when you're the worker, you have this law. Masi Rav Zucha. So Rav Zucha asked the kasha. Okay, good. So we're done. But now let me go back to Rav Yana Rabbi Yochanan. You're telling me what? You're telling me what? When you chayav and meiser? Only when you took it into the house or when you took it into the courtyard, each one respectively. Didn't we learn in a Mishnah? Ezu Gor. No, the word goren is a word that applies to grains. It's the word for the threshing, the threshing floor. It's called what we call the Gemar Malacha. When you find by grain, when you finally make the pile and smooth it out, that's called the completion of its process. But we use the word goren for all the different things, for all anything. No, once the paradigm was grain, because the pasuk used that, but once the paradigm was grain, we call it goren. What's the goren of other produce? Other produce may not have a goren; they don't have a pile, but the completion of the work by other produce is known as it's like Kleenex. You know what I mean? You like Kleenex. It became the brand name. You understand? Yeah, tissue. Kleenex became the word for tissue. So goren, even though that's really the word for the end of processing of grain, that became the word for end the processing of anything. When did you make the grain pile? So what is the goren of other produce? In other words, when is it called the processing is finished? Ezu goren the meiser. When is the processing finished for meiser? So be kishuim midluim when it comes to squashes and the pumpkins, whatever you call them, mishi pasku. It's when the flower, or we're going to see, starts to fall off. When the flower is falling off, there's this big flower at the end, and when the flowers start falling off, already you already consider the crop obligated for myself. Remember Avasi said, what does that mean? What is I preempted? What does it mean mishi pasku? Mishi noto piko shalem. When the flower there's a big flower at the end at the top, it starts to fall off. Okay, uh, um, so when they start falling off, okay, when they fall off, that's when you have to take meiser. My law, what does it mean? Mishi pasku doesn't mean that they once they fell off, even if it's in the field, you're obligated, okay, and not in the house or the courtyard, the way these rabbis learn. Lo mishi pasku babais. It means what? No, they're in the house, and then it fell. It's the flowers fall off. Ayach, if that's true, mishi pasku. Okay, why did it say what when they that what when they will fall off? It sounds like what only from when they actually fell off. It should say Achi Pasku. Since so no, when I say to you Mishi Pasku, it sounds like the only criterion for being obligated is that the flower falls off, but you don't need it to be in the house or the courtyard. And if it was really according to you, what you need both. You told me what you need the flower to fall, but it has to be what both the flower fell off and it's in the house. He said it shouldn't say Nishi Pasku from when the flower falls off. Achi Pasku until the flower falls off. No, no, even though you brought it into the house or the courtyard, but until the flower falls off, you're not obligated. So if it's really a combination of the two, it shouldn't say when the flower falls off. It should say until the flower falls off. The Gemara says that you're right, but a Tanachi Pascha really means that. It really means until they fell off. But see, if it had learned until they fall off, Aviyamina would have mistakenly thought ad the Gemara le Pikuseyu. It has to be what that until all of the flowers fall off, you're not obligated. Kamashma Mishi Pascha. No, from once they are falling off, Michit Chuli Isukayu. Once they're starting to fall off already, you don't have to have all of them fall off. Once it starts to fall off, that's already sufficient. Okay, so therefore what? So we answered that what? So we still defended the opinion that what? Ultimately, at least on the Torah, you're not obligated for Chuvas Amaisa until it goes into the house or the courtyard to keep each respective opinion. Masiv Marzucha Reid of Nachman. Okay, again, we want to ask the kasha again to these two opinions that you need it coming into the house or into the courtyard. Grona Lamaisa, we learned that again, the Grona, we said here the pile, but we really mean what? The finishing processing for Meiser, the Chayvel Mishum Tebel to be obligated to that a person consumed on my Tebel on Meiser things. Mishitigomer Malachtan, it's when the work with the processing is done. Bezu Malachtan, okay, what's considered completing the processing? Melechas Hachnosasan. Now, you notice, what do we call the synagogue? Beit Knesset or the Beit Knesset. So it's a place where you gather in. So they're learning what? It says Melechas Achnasasa. So when it tells us what that it's the gathering, is it Ma'ila Achnasasan? Isn't that what it means? Achnasasan. Okay, that means you gathered them even in the field. So what? The second you gather the produce even in the field, okay, we're learning Knesset Achnasa here as gathering. So you see what? You don't need the house or the courtyard. Akasha teaches these two rabbis. No, achnasas labayit. No, it doesn't mean that. It actually means the other way. Achnasa doesn't mean like gathering. It means what? Bringing them in, literally. You can learn achnasa as gathering, or you can learn achnasa as bringing in. No, it's not gathering. It means literally to bring it in. Zog, okay, achnasa zabai zog. Literally bringing it into the house. That is the end of its processing. If I say more alternatively, so again we defended that. By saying I could say, you know what? No, you're right. He says, he come Rabbi Yanai, he says, when Rabbi Yanai said that once you bring it, that you're not obligated till you bring it into the house, it's not by all produce. It was specifically by what? By olives and by olives and grapes. Why? The lab b'nei because by definition they're never piled up. We don't do that. We don't pile those things up. So therefore, what? So the processing was you bring it into the house. And these are, but I'm sorry I wasn't clear. This is talking about olives and grapes that you want to eat, not olives and grapes that you're going to squeeze. Olives and grapes you're going to eat, we don't pile up. I'm sorry. Okay. So those things, there's no pile. So therefore what? So when do we say what? When do we say that the gathering, even in the field, is obligating by things that we don't, things that's good, that's by things that we don't pile up. So for example, olives for eating or grapes for eating. since we don't pile them up, once you gather them in the field, and when did we say what you have to bring it to the house? When it comes to wheat or barley, going behedzik, see it's written in the pasuk talks about what piling the grain up. Okay. Uh, 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 I said the opposite way. I said it backwards. When did he say what? When did we say what? When did Rabbi Yanai say what? That you're only chayiv until it goes to the house. Things that you don't pile up. So where's that? That's specifically by grapes or olives you can eat. So until you put it in the house, it's not done. Labine going because we don't pile them up. Avachit sarim, but when it comes to wheat or to barley, going behedzik sivabe. They're piling up is specific. So now we have a tremendous breakthrough. We changed. First, we thought that these opinions were by all produce. They were saying by all produce, you're not obligated to bring it out. Say, no. When are you only obligated to bring it to the house? Things that you don't pile up. So if, for example, grapes or olives that you're going to eat that we don't pile up, then you're only obligated to bring it to the house. But of course even they admit that that produce, once you pile it up, it's done. So that we had two ways to look at it. Okay. Yeah. So since we don't, by then most of their grapes and their olives were for squeezing. Grapes were for wine, and olives were for making oil. Okay. Yeah. Ashkelon. Okay, good. So now we did not bad. And the truth is that I oversimplified everything that we just read. To just be honest with you, I did, because there's so many arguments about what is high from the Torah and what's high rabbinically, etc. We just made it easier for the sake of making it easier. we made it. We make it easier for the sake of making it easier. Okay, now back to the ranch. We've been talking about what? We were talking about the law that the worker has a right to eat from the produce that he's working in the owner's field. So remember, yesterday we said there are actually two laws here. Well, a person who works on the produce that's on the growing stage is only allowed to eat at the end at the harvesting stage. If you're a grower worker, you're only allowed to eat at the time of the harvest. If you're a processor, which is from the harvest onwards, you're allowed to eat all the way until what? Till the end of the process. So now, Eshkechon Adam Mechubar, we found clearly in the pasuk that the guy who's working is allowed to eat from when they harvest the grain that was connected to the when he's working on the stuff that's connected to the ground. We know that he can eat when they harvest. Bishar Batolish, and I also know that an ox is allowed to eat. You're not allowed to muzzle the ox when it's working on grain that was harvested. Why? Because it says the pasuk said clearly you can't muzzle the ox when it's threshing. But when it's threshing, it's already been harvested. How do we know, like we assumed yesterday, but how do we know that a human worker is allowed to eat even produce after the harvest? He's a worker who comes on from the harvest onwards. How do we know he's allowed to eat when he's threshing or doing other things? So he says, Kavachomer, sure. We can learn it as a Kavachomer from the case of the ox. An ox, even though it really can eat both from harvested and not harvested, but an ox where the pasuk doesn't say explicitly that it can eat from what's connected, it can eat what's from what's connected. You're not allowed to muzzle even work on connected. But the Torah, from an ox, where the Torah doesn't tell me explicitly that it can eat from what's connected, it only tells me non-connected. If an ox, where it doesn't tell me it can eat from connected, can eat from disconnected. A man with the pasuk clearly told me that he's allowed to eat from what's connected, because that was the case was what when they're gonna cut it down with the side, ain't of din all the more so he should be if the Torah explicitly said he can eat from what's connected, certainly should be able to eat from what's disconnected. I says, get out of here. How can you learn from an ox to a man? One second. Maybe an ox, of course, an ox can eat in what's disconnected, because an ox, the Torah is very, very stringent about letting an ox eat. It says you're not allowed to muzzle it. Okay, so you can't learn a kavachomer. Maybe a man is more stringent because a man and he can't eat from what's disconnected because we were never commanded not to muzzle a man like we learned yesterday. I the mitzuva and what and Gemara says so what? He says even if the man is obligated, so what? That doesn't mean you can't learn it out. He says al chasim even if you would be obligated not to muzzle a man, mikavacham b'shor. Okay, it was, and I might have thought, pardon me. What do you mean the man? How can you knock me off and say what a man we're not obligated? Maybe a man you not. Maybe you are forbidden to muzzle a man. Why? We should learn a kavachomer to say you're not allowed to muzzle him. And if I can learn it from an ox, you're certainly a man. Why? An ox, you have no commandment to keep an ox alive. You never see a lot of mazur. Adam shots up. It says that your brother has to live with you. You have to keep your brother. You have to keep your brother alive. So if you're obligated to keep a man alive in a din shatam certainly you can't muzzle him. And that's why we learned yesterday what like no, just like the boss, also the worker. Okay, what just like the worker, just like the you're just like the worker. Just like you, just like if you muzzle yourself, you're not obligated. If you muzzle him, you're not. So you're right. I could have learned what you can't muzzle a man for Kavachomer, but the limi we learned yesterday from the pasuk tells me that there's no prohibition there's no lashes for muzzling a worker. We had the whole b'tosh. So now I'm stuck there. And you're right. So how do I know? How do I know that a man is allowed to eat when he's a worker that comes on for the processing after the harvesting? Because it says kama shtei pamim. 2 times the pasuk says the grain or the produce that's standing above ground. The pasuk says you're going to come to the standing produce of your family. You're gonna cut off you're gonna pluck the ears with your hand, okay? But you're not allowed to place the low soda. But it says what? So it's first said comma, and then it says behermesh lo torifa komas riach. Again, it says the second time, and don't put it aside on the standing produce of your friend. So 2 times it says what comma? It says standing produce. He says we're there for what? He says he says there for what? Comma shtei pam. He says it twice. If it doesn't apply to a man when it's connected, because we already learned it, Taneu, you have to use the word Indian law that we're talking about, but when a man, when it is already harvested. Now this principle, I just want to take a minute to explain, certainly, because we have so much time. And everybody here is old enough to remember, but I don't know if you knew about it. There's a toy that all the kids loved. My kids were little, they were called Transformers. What were Transformers? They were toys that they could change from a robot to a vehicle, or from a vehicle to a robot. And they were very popular. My kids loved them. All the kids loved them. It was a robot and a vehicle. Where did it come from? This is what people don't know. In Japan, which was the leaders, so they used to have a competition. The engineers in Japan it was a competition because the engineering feat to design, this product that could fold into a vehicle or fold into a robot. It could go back and forth. It became so popular that eventually they made movies and all kinds of paraphernalia, to make a lot of money. But those were the Transformers. So in modern technology, you'll see a very interesting thing, and that is especially in our lifetimes. So we saw that as electronics came, etc., people were looking for miniaturization and changing. So to get things smaller and smaller. And you have to, if you don't understand the engineering problems in electronics, you won't understand what you're looking at when you open up something electrical or electronic and you look inside. You won't understand the positioning. Things don't make sense. Why? Because you'll find that why's these wires doing over here? This wires has to do with a different system in the thing. What's it doing over here by the speaker? What's it doing here by it doesn't believe it. So the answer is you have to know. If you don't understand the problem of miniaturization or design, you won't understand placement, because placement is not always about categorization. It's about the physical limitations of topology and engineering. To give you an example, a lot of times, who will pack when your family's going away? Let's say mom will do the packing, and you find something very strange. They'll go away to vacation, and dad says to mom, "Where is my shaver?" Mom says, "Oh, it's in Sis's shoe." What's a shaver do? What does a shaver have to do with a shoe? There's no connection to a shaver in a shoe. You're right. In categorization, stick with me. It's very important, I'm telling you. In categorization, shoes and shavers have nothing to do with each other. But if you're a packer and you know topology and space, the perfect place for what? For a shaver is a shoe. Why? A shoe is a big waste of space. It takes up a lot of area and it's empty. It's empty. So anybody who's a good packer knows that the perfect mate for a shoe is a shaver. It's perfect. So if you think of categories Shavers and shoes have nothing to do with each other. If you think of categories, you understand the wiring from the wiring, from the magnet in the transistor radio has nothing to do with the speaker. Why is the wiring going around the speaker? The answer is because there's a big empty space. There's a big empty space there. You understand? Now, believe it or not, this applies also to the Torah. Here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, don't worry, he has no problem. He can do whatever he wants. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to pack all of existence into a chumash. This is ridiculous. The whole creation you're going to put into a chumash? That's a tiny book. If you take a chumash without mefarshim, it's a little book. It's a very little book. God got to put the whole universe into that place. Okay, there's a great feat of what? Of miniaturization. You have to be able to stick it in there. So now we have a principle. If you don't realize what I just said to you, you'll never understand this principle. So a principle called Inu Inyan Lakan, sometimes there's a verse or a phrase, and it teaches me something, but it absolutely does not connect to its place. We say, no problem. Just get in, put the key in, and drive it to the nearest place that it applies. That's called Inyan Lakan, Tnei Lakan. Hashem, in order to miniaturize the whole universe, he said, listen, he's teaching wise students. Here, I stuck it in. You're right. It's not exactly applicable to this exact place. Just go down the street till you find a parking space and you'll find it. You'll find exactly the nearest place you understand that one where it makes perfect sense. So since what? Now you told me what? You had to come tell me that what that I'm allowed to eat. But there's no problem over there. I already know that I'm allowed to eat from where? That the worker's allowed to eat from what? When he works on the grain before it's harvested, that must be what? It's got to teach me what? The law of the worker will be allowed to eat from the grain after it's harvested. And that's the principle of Khan. Okay, in Lakan. If it doesn't fit here, it's in. If it's not, you don't apply it here, you apply it here. Sharba mechubar minolan. Okay, let me ask another question though. So how do I know? That's very nice. But when the Torah told me I can't muzzle an ox, it said, "What al tachsam shor bedisha." You shouldn't muzzle an ox while it's threshing. Minolan. So how do I know what? Like I said to you before, the truth is it's only not written, but we know it's true. How do we know that an ox is? You're not allowed to muzzle an ox even when it's working on unharvested produce. The answer is what? Kal v'chomer yodam. I can learn as a kal v'chomer from a man. Ma adam she'ena ochel b'talush. Now what? Just like if a man, where the Torah does, though he can, where the Torah doesn't explicitly say he can eat from the uh, harvested produce, even though we know he can, like we just explained, but it doesn't say explicitly ochel b'mechuber. If it by a man where it doesn't tell me explicitly he can eat from the detached, he can eat from the attached. Shor shochel b'talush, but ox where the Torah told me he can eat from the detached. And a din shochel b'mechuber, all the more so what? It's clear that what it should be allowed to eat from what's connected. I can so 1 second. How can you say such a thing? Maybe a man has a more severe rule. Ma adam shekain atam lachioso. If a man, no, but you have an obligation to feed a man. So maybe a man who, in general, I'm obligated to keep him alive. So yeah, so that's why that's why I have to let the worker eat from connected. Tomer b'shor. How can you say by an ox an ox? I'm not obligated to keep it alive. So maybe I'm not obligated to let it eat from what's connected. Where it says I be hey b'shor. 1 second. Who told you don't have to keep an ox alive? I should learn them all. Just like I'm obligated to keep a man alive, I have to keep an ox alive. If a man where I have no prohibition, like we learned before, on muzzling him, there's no lashes for muzzling a man, but yet I'm still obligated to keep him alive. Sure, an ox, which you get lashes for what? For muzzling it, and a din certainly you have to keep it alive. Amar says, no, it's not true. Why? It says your brother will live with you. Achicha, your brother, lo shor, and not an ox. New, so I'm stuck now. Then I'm back in the home. So how do I know it really in the truth? How do I know that an ox, I can't stop it, I can't muzzle it even when it's working on connected produce? Amar the pasuk says, re'echa shtei pamim. The pasuk says 2 times your friend. Kitavo b'kamas re'echa, when you come into the standing produce of your friend, you're going to pick the ears with your hand. And you should you're not allowed to wave the side on what? On the standing grain of your friend. So it says twice, your friend twice, okay? Okay, so again, so if it doesn't apply, I already know that a man, that the human worker is allowed to eat what from when he works on the produce when it's standing. And I have to learn it there. What is it coming to teach me the second time? It's coming to tell me what, to tell me what about an ox. Okay, when it is connected. This is how we've learned everything. We know a man by disconnected, connected by a worker. We know ox by Muslim, both by connected and disconnected. It's a good stopping place. Everyone have a wonderful day. Shavuot.
What's going to be the daf yomi on Wednesday?
Oh, that's a good question, but there's no daf yomi on Tuesday. It's
Wednesday
No,
is
Tuesday. There's only one meeting.
on
And there's schmaltzy.
on Tuesday.
But there's no
Is it-
breakfast.
No, there's
So
no
we could
bread.
have the
It
daf
could
at
be
a
right
quarter
after the
to,
dinner.
Oh, Kevin, no, there's not a problem.
daf at a quarter to
Wednesday.
10.
Yeah.
Yes,
Got it.
I mean,
Okay, if
Oh, it's not a problem. So
Like,
it's a
it's
done.
like Rosh Chodesh.
Like
Yeah.
Rosh Chodesh. Okay, good.
Okay.
Start
No,
after.
but I need to know what time.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Quarter
saying.
to 10.
Figure when we,
Wednesday.
when we have Rosh
I
Chodesh.
know, but I'm not.
No, I understand. Neither will I on Wednesday. That's a week,
Wednesday, they're
a
saying.
week from
They're
Wednesday.
saying,
It's
Hallel.
not this Wednesday,
Next week, no?
No,
It's
the
next
Yom
week.
Yerushalayim.
not this Wednesday,
Oh,
next.
a week from Wednesday. Oh.
Oh, it's a week. Oh, I'm a week.
Next week.
You're a
Next
week
week.
off.
Yeah, what you have 1 million you say Hallel, and one you don't. You can't walk out. You have to stay.
You do.
That's why I don't.
You walk out every day.
No, I walk out. So
I agree with